Hello and welcome to a new video about the Roman Empire. Today we will talk again about slavery. As mentioned in the video before, I said it really didn't matter where slaves came from, because the Romans didn't mind all slaves. They wanted as many slaves as possible, you could say. In Rome there were slaves from the Germanic tribes, there were slaves from Gallica, there were slaves from Britannica. There were Arabian slaves, Asian slaves, African slaves. There were basically slaves from everywhere. But we want to look today which were Romans' favorite slaves, because they actually existed. There were slaves that were more expensive than others, obviously. For example, if you look at field work, there were strong slaves that have a good body build, that were very much more expensive than very thin slaves that couldn't do all of that work so well. Gladiators were very expensive slaves, for example, because they also were ideal to fight and they needed a lot of training. Years of experience, not to say. Then, on the other hand, we have obviously smart slaves. And by smart slaves, I say, for example, slaves that have a special skill, that can do special work. They are obviously more expensive than normal slaves that can't do this special work. Slaves that can read and slaves that can write. Also more expensive. But the most expensive slaves of all are Greek slaves. Why Greek though? I hear you ask. Well, that has a very simple reason. Because Romans wanted to teach their children Greek. And if you have a Greek slave, the chance is high that this slave can teach your children actually Greek. And this was really much like the language of the rich people, of the smart people, Greek, also in Rome, of the cultivated people. So it was very much that people said, yeah, I want to teach my children Greek, so I will just buy a Greek slave for that. So Greek slaves were really expensive. It even came to that some of the not so rich people pretended they have Greek slaves. They just gave their slaves Greek names, basically to show them their friends when they come to visit them. Oh yes, that's my Greek slave. And this was really kind of a status symbol in Roman times to have a Greek slave. They could sometimes also teach philosophy, mathematics, etc. There was a vast field. Slaves could teach basically children literature. Also, there are many different aspects of that. Of course, not every Greek slave could teach everything. There were specialized slaves for everything, and the price varied over them. But basically, we can say that Greek slaves were the Roman favorite slaves. They were the most expensive. Obviously, there were slaves for many different kind of works, many things the slaves had to do, and there the price varied as well. It is really much like a very big market for slaves, and every different aspect of skill really depended and differentiated the price. Sometimes slave traders tried to cheat a little bit and gave their slaves skill they didn't really have, just to get a higher price. This could obviously get to problems, but sometimes slave traders were only in a city for a couple of days, and when the owner found out, oh, the slave doesn't even have to trade, the slave trader is already away. It was not so easy in the Roman Empire to find a criminal if it was a traveling one. For example, merchants. It was not so common that, for example, someone that made a crime in Rome gets, for example, caught in Alexandria. It was very different time. I would argue crime was back then way easier, and to get away with crime was also pretty much easier than today. But anyway, there's one huge topic here as well. And this is actually people that sell their children as slaves. Yes, you heard correctly, some people sold their children as slaves. But this is not really a thing where they say, oh no, I hate my child. What a bad child, I sell it into slavery. Well, maybe this happened as well. But mostly it were families that had very little and couldn't actually feed their kid. So they were, yeah, I will sell my kid into slavery to, for example, a rich guy, and then I know my child can grow up, my child gets food, etc. And I get a little bit money to feed me and my family a little bit more. This was the major point why some people sold their children into slavery, mostly younger ones. They sometimes even sold themselves into slavery because there were high debts they had to pay and they couldn't afford it. So they were like, okay, I sell myself into slavery to pay off my debts. That was also a thing that could happen. So it was not only that people from outside were slaves, but also people from inside. People that had no other choice but to sell their kids or even themselves into slavery. For some it wasn't really a good thing actually. They sold themselves into slavery, could pay off their debts, and having a good master that paid them a little bit for their work, and were eventually able, for example, after 15 years, to buy yourself out of slavery into freedom. And then you are free again, free of debts, and you made a little bit of money, maybe learned even a skill. So slavery was not for everyone that bad. For some people it was a real opportunity. Obviously there's always this risk with selling yourself into slavery, since if you have a bad master, it very much could be a shit life for you. But let's look at the positive things. And I want to point out that I'm obviously against slavery, but I just find it very fascinating how slavery in the Roman Empire worked. While slavery in the Roman Empire had also positive things, we see imperialist, colonialism, slavery has almost only negative points. So we can see here like a little bit the difference, how slaves in the ancient times could be treated way worse, but also way better than back in the colonial time. But we should not forget that those who profit the most from slavery are often the owners of the slaves. And it very much depends on how you get treated in slavery, what the owner is, and who the owner is. Some may be nice, some may be bad. This is always has a little bit to do with luck, to which owner you get. Mostly if you are skilled and smart slave, basically, you can read, write, for example, also speak Greek, you could have a good life in slavery. On the other hand, if you were unskilled and you were doomed to work on the field, your life can be very horrible. The possibility is even high on the field that your life is very horrible and you just work till death. I hope you liked this video and I hope you could learn something. If you have any advices or ideas, just write them down in the comments. Questions are always welcome. I wish you a good day and see you in the next one. Bye.